The use of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States during World War II remains one of the most controversial and debated topics in history. While some argue that it was a necessary measure to expedite the end of the war and save lives, others view it as an unnecessary act of mass destruction and a violation of humanity. In this video, we will comprehensively examine the reasons behind America's decision to use nuclear weapons on Japan, taking into account the historical context, military considerations, and ethical implications. The decision to use nuclear weapons must be viewed in the context of the Pacific War between the United States and Japan during World War II. By mid-1945, Japan had suffered significant military defeats, but it refused to surrender, and its leadership vowed to fight until the bitter end. The Allied forces faced the daunting prospect of continuing a costly and bloody conventional invasion to conquer the Japanese mainland. To understand the decision, it is essential to consider the development of nuclear weapons under the Manhattan Project. Behind the scenes, scientists were racing against time to harness the power of the atom. The project succeeded, and the United States possessed the world's most destructive weapon, capable of altering the course of the war. Before the use of nuclear weapons, the United States considered other options to end the war. The first alternative was a continued conventional bombing campaign, which had already devastated major Japanese cities and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. However, this approach had not prompted Japan's surrender. The second alternative was a full-scale invasion of the Japanese homeland, known as Operation Downfall, estimated to cost millions of lives on both sides. Japan's leadership, deeply rooted in its Bushido Code and reluctant to surrender, made the situation more challenging. Their refusal to acknowledge the inevitability of defeat, coupled with their determination to extract heavy casualties from Allied forces, raised concerns about the prolonged and costly nature of conventional warfare. The Japanese government's unwillingness to seek peace, even after the Hiroshima bombing, added weight to America's decision. The Potsdam Declaration, issued by Allied leaders in July 1945, demanded Japan's unconditional surrender. However, it failed to provide assurances about the fate of Japan's emperor, Hirohito, whom the people considered divine. Japan's leadership deemed the declaration unacceptable, leading to a deadlock in negotiations. Thus, the use of nuclear weapons was seen by some as an instrument to compel Japan to surrender unconditionally. From a military standpoint, the use of nuclear weapons offered several advantages. Firstly, it was believed to be the fastest and most effective way to bring the Pacific War to a swift conclusion. The destructive power of the atomic bombs meant that only a small number of attacks were required to cripple Japan's industry and infrastructure, diminishing its ability to sustain war efforts. This calculation aimed to save more lives in the long run by avoiding a prolonged invasion. Furthermore, it was argued that the use of nuclear weapons would demonstrate American military superiority to the world, acting as a deterrent against potential future conflicts and ensuring America's position as a global superpower. While these military considerations lay behind the decision, the ethical implications and the immense human cost of using nuclear weapons cannot be ignored. The bombings resulted in the immediate deaths of approximately 200,000 people, with many more suffering long-term physical and psychological consequences. Critics argue that such grossly disproportionate and indiscriminate killing should never be justified, regardless of the war's circumstances. Proponents of the bombings argue that they were necessary to prevent further loss of life on both sides. It is estimated that an invasion of Japan would have resulted in millions of casualties, including soldiers and civilians. By abruptly demonstrating the devastating impact of nuclear weapons, America sought to shock Japan into surrender, avoiding a protracted and bloodier conflict. So, dear friends, the decision to use nuclear weapons on Japan remains a contentious issue, with valid arguments and counter-arguments from different perspectives. The context of the Pacific War, military considerations, and the reluctance of Japan's leadership to surrender must all be acknowledged when contemplating this decision. While it is essential to learn from history, we must also strive to ensure that the horrors of nuclear warfare are never repeated. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki emphasize the necessity of promoting peace, diplomacy, and international cooperation in resolving conflicts to prevent the devastating consequences that nuclear weapons can inflict on humanity.